We come to the 39th presentation in this year-long Parayana inquiry and teaching. And in 52, 39 is 3/4 of the way through. And so this presentation has a structural geometry in a sequence, but the sequence itself is within a year that is a very much larger sequence. And this is the 6th year of that larger sequence that started when the 2006-2007 Learning Civilization 2-year program was the culmination of about 40 some years of work. And that is now, just now, after 6 years of completing that, available on an iPad app, beautifully done, with all the music, all the films, all of the presentations, all of the projects complete, so that you could take it anywhere in the world or off-world and have it at your fingertips, available. In the 6 years since 2007, I have every year brought into play addenda series years to that the Learning Civilization 2006-07 program. In 2008, the program was a condensation of the 2 years into 1 year, and it was called Paired Phase Transforms. And this was at the suggestion of my wonderful wife, Nisa, to find some way to do an advanced form of the 2-year program, which took about 40 some years, as I say, to bring into fruition and to have the refinement so that it actually was a recalibration of what it was addressing, and that is the problem and the promise of civilization. Not plural, because culture belongs to a worldly population of people like ourselves, but civilization has dimensions of consciousness which extend, in fact, beyond our kind, our world, so that one of the most powerful years of presentation since the 26-07 Learning Civilization, in that addenda, one of the most powerful years was the science fiction vision. And in the science fiction vision, my presentations gave us an insight that there was a seminal moment, a entering threshold about 1895 with the publication of H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. And in fact, coming up about 100 years ago, in 1915, which will be the centenary just next year, H.G. Wells was in Los Angeles, and he was at the Laemmle Studios, and he was discussing the early developments of the art of film, when film was still silence. And this is H.G. Wells and Carl Laemmle, whose theater chain, the Laemmle Theaters, is still extant. You can find it advertised in the LA Times and Southern California newspapers every week. This studio became RKO Pictures and then became Republic Pictures. They made a lot of westerns. And then became Channel 7 ABC TV and is in the Franklin Hills district, just to the west of Los Feliz. The appearance of H.G. Wells in the middle of the 1890s signaled that there was a resonance happening, and very quickly the resonance bore itself out. In 1895, about the same time that The Time Machine was published, the discovery of X-rays, Röntgen accidentally having photographic undeveloped stock in a drawer, and a piece of radium also in the drawer, and there were clouds on the negatives, and it was discovered that there are pictures of invisible light, X-ray light, and within a year, the discovery of the electron by J.J. Thomson in England at the Cavendish laboratory. What we're looking at now in 2014, almost 100 some years, coming up 120 years later, is a development which is rather enormous in terms of civilization, in terms of our species refinement, in terms of the way in which civilization now is going to belong to the entire star system. So I have called that a stellar civilization, and that the species has refined to Homo sapiens stellaris, star wisdom man. Star, stellaris, wisdom, sapiens, Homo man. And star wisdom man will consciously live on the interstellar frontier, which extends as far as you can possibly imagine. In fact, the interstellar frontier extends to the entire galactic structure, not just of the Milky Way, but extends to the satellite galaxies, like the large and small Magellanic Clouds in the southern hemisphere are satellite galaxies. They're moon galaxies to our own. And in fact, our galactic structure, the Milky Way with all of its satellites, are heavily related by very large gravity attractions and fields to another large galaxy, the Andromeda, and its satellite galaxies, and many smaller galaxies, so that there's a cluster. And it turns out not only is there a cluster of galaxies that move together within the larger form of the universe that was only recently discovered, where it is that our galactic cluster, our galaxy, containing all the billion star systems that there are, is in fact in a very large structure itself. And that structure was found and just recently, within the month, and featured in many journals, and Nature, the International Journal of Science, for as long as H.G. Wells has been alive and writing. And since it was discovered in Hawaii at the Keck pair of telescopes on top of Mauna Kea, it's given a Phoenician Hawaiian name, Laniakea, means the highest heaven. And Laniakea looks very much like a very familiar sight, and until I disclose it, it won't occur to us that this is a very familiar sight. This is, in terms of light years, 500 million light years across. It has more galactic clusters than we have stars in our galaxy. And it has a pair to it that is almost a mirror pair. And we have talked about how it's called the Pisces-Perseus supergalactic cluster. So that the pair together make a billion light year dimension, which fits into now a cognition of the universe as having an enormous structure. The structure being something which is not evenly distributed, but has nodes and voids. The nodes connected by large energy, gravitational patternings, so that we have a very interesting universe. Laniakea is very much like the way in which a lightning strike in our atmosphere would record. And so the super duper cluster of galaxies, our own Milky Way, is on the very tip of this protuberance here of this energy node, and the entire cluster of our galactic neighborhood, in fact, occupies like the arrow point of an enormous energy surge within a context that is like the entire lightning strike of what? It is the lightning strike of time instantly, since there is now time, instantly, space, so that space-time is this trail of the lightning flash, but the energy of the lightning is time as a dynamic, which gives us an insight, as we have been following here, that our current life generation is the first of a threshold experiencing the lightning flash that will turn on the old cartoon image of the light bulb in thought. We have the idea now, not only of progress, not only of evolution, not only of all of the other qualities of promise and expectation, but in fact what we have is the beginnings of a consciousness that has become not only scientific, but brings with it a kaleidoscopic historical dimension of consciousness, and that they pair together, that history and science in their dimensionality pair together resonantly. They're like some of the juice that goes into the lightning bolt that turns on the ideas in the symbolic structure of the mind, but the preparation for history and science to turn on the symbolic light comes from vision as a field and the development of persons who are creatively imaginative and capable of remembering, not just memory, but remembering. And this remembering and this creative imagining develops art. And so we understand that there was in the learning civilization the beginning of 4 seasons of nature as a cycle that morphed and transformed its way as we made our concourse through it into a cycle of phases, 4 phases, that now with a new field, we began with the field of nature, and now a new field, the field of consciousness, which will form a complementarity, and does, with nature. Nature being an integral cycle vision initiating a differential conscious ecology, out of which art not only as another phase, but as another dimension, so that the artist is actually a six-dimensional person, prismatic, able to carry the fifth dimension, the magical transformative dimension of vision, through their creations, through their art, not just the art of painting, of sculpture, of architecture, but the art even of person creating, not just person making, as Virginia Satir's wonderful phrase used to be in the 1950s, but of creating the prismatic person, the jewel-like facets that then are not only differential but kaleidoscopic. So that historical consciousness as a seventh dimension brings an eighth dimension of science into play in such a way that we now have a ninth dimension of complementarity, of the twin fours coming together as an eight, but making a ninth, which is the complementarity. And we talked last presentation about how music, once it achieved a scalar form in ancient Greco-Egyptian wisdom understanding of an octave, one was able to have a continuity of many octaves that wove together, and that the seamlessness of this is extendable in further dimensions from art, the art of music, to the science that brings music into play in a kaleidoscopic way and gives an analytic in terms of a cosmic way of understanding. And now we all have available computers that are able to work with 2 million colors plus. So that we have come in the last 2,500 years to understand that the last centuries have indeed been extremely different as a springboard from building on what came before, but taking it to many octaves above where it had been. In the Renaissance, for the first time, about 500 years ago, you began to have the sense that a musical composition was able to have a personal quality which was in fact prismatic, and the development out of something that was like a Gregorian chant became the ability to have the lyric quality of a song which would be able to express something that was unthinkable, not even creative, in a medieval scholastic Gregorian chant limitation of music. And in the early 20th century, one of the great composers who developed his compositions to go into teaching music creatively to children. The man's name was Carl Orff, and one can still find his music for children, where children learned with striking little blocks of wood, little triangles, little drums, and so forth, that you could build a quality to where the song, lyric quality of music would emerge out of these kindergarten, grade school, musical explorations of rhythm, of the way in which a time signature can be varied and interpenetrated. And Carl Orff then developed an exemplar composition in music in 3 parts, and the first part became very famous. It was called Carmina Burana. And Carmina Burana are the songs in classical scholastic Latin of love affairs of men and women in their own personal lives. And this signaled the quality of reaching back in time and reaching from the present new transform of what a person was, what a personality might be, and especially the interchange of personalities, that the whole question that came to the fore about that time, which is the time of the great impress of the science fiction vision reaching out and not just being there for a few geniuses or a few people who were like vanguards, but a growing population of people understanding something completely new has dawned. And one of the issues, in fact, one of the crises that has occurred, is a crisis in identity. That the whole codification of an equation of balance, that one then, when everything fit together, it fit together in such a way that one could identify, not only identify one's own identity as being, I am this, I am that I am, but the resonance of it, that you are who you are, and that our identities need somehow to interchange. And all of this became problematic as the 20th century developed, especially into the 1930s. The person who made use of language and invented the term identity crisis was Erik Erikson. He lived to be almost 94 years old. He was born in a part of northern Germany that was heavily influenced by the Scandinavian countries, especially Sweden. And one of his important books, Identity, Use, and Crisis, came out as a part of a whole life cycle. This edition of the Life Cycle Completed was edited by his lifelong wife and partner, Joan M. Erikson. And she, with Erik, made a whole career of many decades of following what they came to understand as an 8-part life cycle. And that 8-part life cycle would eventually, in the way in which the wife, who survived Erik by a number of years, and in her new edition of the Life Cycle Completed, she includes a 9th stage. Together, largely on his accreditation, though she was equally involved in putting this together, he became famous and she became the helper for him. But in the expanded version of the life cycle, the 9th stage, she writes, when the 8 stages were initially charted, it seemed, she's wanting to be talked about, and she will be, it seemed obvious that apart from the infant's arrival date, such variety exists in the timing of human development that no age specifications could be validated for each stage independent of social criteria and pressures. And so it isn't a life cycle by ages, but it is a life cycle by maturation. And the thresholds of each stage of maturation had for itself a challenge. Now, neither Eric nor Joan Erickson were cognizant of the incredible ancientness of what it was that they were rediscovering. Not just the octave, or in ancient Egyptian, it was called the Ogdode. The Ogdode being that there are 8 fundamental, divine presences in 4 pairs. And these 4 pairs of gods, these 8 gods, there were 4 masculine and 4 feminine. And that Ogdode, when a human being was able to comprehend, not just apprehend, but comprehend, a 9th spiritual quality emerged out of not just the great complementarity of the 8, but a 9th which could not be named. Eventually, the reference to that 9th came to be embodied as the sun, as Ra or Re, depending on your pronunciation of it. And Re was the hidden, invisible silence behind the 8 gods, 2 of which, like Osiris and Isis, became very popular even till today. The others, like Nut and Tefnut, Nut is as important as Isis because she is the one that has the star-spangled body that reaches from horizon to horizon. Her toes and her fingertips span the entire horizon of the world, so that when one was of a inheritance of great wisdom and buried thereby, the new kingdom, moving away from the sarcophagus that was limestone that ate the body. A very successful burial in a sarcophagus is that there was no body there. The limestone would have dissolved it all and absorbed it. And so the empty sarcophagus was proof that you had transcended, that you were in eternity now and no longer shackled to the world. But the revision of it, the recalibration of it, was that the eternity can come back into this world because the exit from this world was a two-way, not a two-way street, but a two-way threshold, because the refinement of the wisdom of the holy and the divine meant that it was like an osmotic membrane that was constantly working from eternity, and that one could re-emerge from the netherworld into the upper world, and one could re-emerge from the upper world back into life. And so the sarcophagus was replaced by the coffin. And the lid of the coffin on the inside had the image of Nut. And she, in her star-spangled body, invited the rebirth. And so the image of the rebirth was the star-spangled sacred woman. That she was the way in which the coffin, holding in its masculine earth way, the lid which was placed in a kind of a juxtaposition of sacredness, that when she rose from that, when the lid of the coffin would be taken off, the rebirth would be initiated and one would come back into life. then the divinity, instead of being Ra, just Ra, was the sacred presence within or behind the mask of the sun. And so it became Amun-Ra. And Amun-Ra then became the way in which one understood that if you had been brought back from eternity into life again, you brought with you all of the coattails, all of the resonances, the entire ability to carry a harmonic into the world from eternity. A priestess of that ancient religion, by the time she was a high priestess of it in the mid-300s BC, gave birth in 356 BC to a son. Her name was Olympias, and her son was Alexander, who became Alexander the Great. And his divinity came through his mother, Olympias, who embodied the star-spangled wisdom of this ancient tradition of coming back into play, into the world, bringing the ability to have an eternal vision of the dimensions of mankind as an entity in its collective self. And so Alexander's great vision from his mother was that all mankind is a very large, complex, diversified family. The Greek word that he learned to apply to that from his tutor, personal tutor, Aristotle, was the ecumene, oikumene in Greek, ecumene in Latin, the one world of man, and that it needed a recalibration so that there was no longer the sense of different warring tribes, different warring sects, but there was a population of mankind that in that complex art of a new vision, one could raise that through the art of prismatic refinement into the kaleidoscopic history of how this plays out and comes to be into the science that one can now ensemble go through that same procedure. Not just a rebirth from eternity for a very special, rare, holy person, but that mankind as a whole could be reborn as a cosmic species, as a star species. The body of Newt guaranteed that she has gifted this capacity with the blessings of her earth as a partner under the aegis of the presence in the sun of Amun-Ra. And when Alexander became matured as the young conqueror by taking Egypt, he made an expedition that was almost unheard of at the time to be successfully done. He took himself and a group very close to him and went into the Sahara Desert all the way down to the Siwa Oasis, to the hidden shrine of Amun-Ra at Siwa. And there was confirmed that he was indeed the son of Amun-Ra, that energy, that his mother had conveyed that. And so Philip, his father, Philip II, was yes, the physical father, but that his true father was the spirit of Amun-Ra to his mother Olympias, and that he was then divine in the sense of the wisdom of his mother, and he was only king in terms of the power of his father. And this set the city of Alexandria as the urban harmonic of the presence of that vision, the promise of that development, the dispensation of something new, so that the life cycle, coming back to the ninth stage, in Alexandria became a quality of revelation. And about 90 AD, in Alexandria, the development of that wisdom became so refined that a series of 13 treatises were written down, collectively called the Hermetica, and there was, in that series of 13, a formative essay, a treatise, called The Eighth Reveals the Ninth. That was specifically taken out of the Hermetica by the Christian church in Alexandria in a corruption of itself hundreds of years later, so that it disappeared, and the final Hermetica was called number 13, the Rebirth, whereas the final of the Hermetica was really a 14th, which was called the Perfect Sermon. That also was excerpted and taken away. The Eighth Reveals the Ninth was found in 1945, and it brought back into play the Eighth Reveals the Ninth, which has as its coda that those who have come to be able to see in the ninth for the first time hear the singing of the choirs to divinity in the 10th, that there is a mystical, unexpected country, a 10-dimensional hyperspace, where the communications in the cosmos really take place. When we come back from the break, we'll take a look at one of the most amazing women of all time, Madame du Châtelet, who was the first to understand the way in which the new reference wave of science actually was carrying this kind of scalar of meaning into mankind. Let's take a little break.